Sounds like a long title for the last session of the day. So it's me between you and a beer. So let's see if we can get through this relatively quickly, and hopefully we can share some interesting stuff on the end of a pretty long day. So what we want to cover is we want to talk about why is being a data-driven business so important, and why is it damn hard. We want to share with you three approaches that we are seeing from some of the best organisations in Australasia. We get to work with about 200 organisations in Australia and New Zealand. So we want to share three of the themes, I guess, that we're seeing going on there. And we want to show you three practical examples that you could take away and start thinking about in your businesses today. And hopefully we'll finish with 3 minutes to spare so we can get you to the bar. Sound okay? Okay, so why is it so damn difficult, and why is it so important to have a data-driven business in the modern world? First of all, it's a people issue, and it's a process issue, and it's a technology issue. And actually the technology issue is often the least of the issues in terms of making this happen. And so typically we start off with looking at our business strategy in our businesses, and it's probably something about how can I sell more of my widgets or my services? How can I get a premium for those widgets and services? How can I take some cost out of my business? And how do I manage risk? Pretty common kind of business strategy. And today we are bombarded with initiatives out of that, digital initiatives for Africa. Typically we're all trying to do something exciting around customer experience, get a single view of the customer, map customer journeys. We are trying to think about our employees and how they relate into that and improve the experience. We get these incredible experiences as customers. We want that in our work lives as well. And we know there's a big tie-in between employee experience and customer experience. We're trying to do a better job with our operations, either because we're trying to take cost out of them, or we're also having to change what we do operationally in our processes because we need to do that to deliver customer experiences. For example, I now need to, as table stakes, track my products right through the entire supply chain and show that to my customers. Well, that requires huge changes in my back-end systems to actually be able to do that. And I've got all these new products and services, rethinking the current stuff that I do and reinventing this in this as a service economy that we live in today. And so we've got a whole lot of people driving these initiatives in our organisations, and they've got an insatiable demand for insight and information to help their initiatives be successful. Huge amounts of structured data and increasingly unstructured data. And I know you've been talking about this today when I look at the agenda. And the reality is it's really hard. It's been really hard to do this. Stats like 80% of the time a data scientist spends in their job is just getting the data prepared, not doing the analysis and let alone doing something about it. It's getting it ready so we can work out what the hell we can even start looking for. And so our people are overloaded, our processes probably aren't lined up to work this way, and our technology is normally a constraint as well, and we just can't keep up with it. And so we get into this endless loop of prioritisation. More and more initiatives, can't keep up, got to get a priority list, new stuff to do, throw some initiatives out. The latest craze is I'm going to have a chief data officer or a chief digital officer who typically will come in, throw out some of the old initiatives and start some new stuff. And hopefully now that's going to fix the problem because I'm doing the same old thing I've been doing for a while. Good luck. And so the business is getting really frustrated at us because they can't get what they want. When they do get it, it's too slow. Sometimes it's not accurate. And often they think it's better to do it themselves, so they'll build their own shadow teams on the side, or worse still, they just go off and make up their own data. Any of you had that problem before in your organisations? I see a few hands and a few nodding heads, right. And so the end result is we end up with organisations, despite this aspiration to be data-driven, and we end up not typically being data-driven. And so we're missing a huge opportunity, but we're also making really poor decisions. And it's costing us massively in terms of rework and time and money. How's this for a stat? Last year, $3.5 trillion invested globally in digital initiatives. 48% of those delivered no return on investment. That's a bloody disaster of an industry to be involved in. Trillions of dollars doing stuff, but not really returning a return on investment. And worse still, we know that these things aren't working, so we spend more time analysing what we're trying to do, and so we get really slow at making decisions. And These days, these digital initiatives go into the digital initiative roadmap and they go there to die because they end up as a proof of concept and we sit there and half the time we make no decision. And it's about to get a whole lot worse. Because today, only 20% of our current business data is structured. And now we've got all these new exponential technologies hitting us. AI, IoT, edge computing, drones, all of these things that are going to pile more and more data in as our world goes exponential on us. And we know that most of these technologies are doubling every 18 months. What does that mean? This device here today, my phone, that's got the computing power of a rat's brain. In 4 years' time, it will have the computing power of a human's brain. In 13 years' time, that will have the computing power of every brain on this planet combined. Imagine what is going to be going on with these devices. And I think you had Liam here from Soul Machines today talking about some of the things that they are doing. Well, imagine the data that we're going to start getting as we start getting emotional responses as well as physical responses. We are just going to get bombarded with it. And so these exponential technologies are just going to cause the volume of data hitting us to just get insane. You think it's tough now? You wait and see what's coming. And the pressure on business initiatives for us to move our businesses forward faster and faster, our boards, our CEOs are going to be screaming to go, I need to do more stuff and I need to do it faster, and it's just going to crush our will to live out of the way we approach things today. So increasingly, there's a real risk here that it's going to become impossible to structure our data in the way that we do it today and move our businesses at the pace that we need to move it forward. Sound like a fun world to be part of? And so what we're seeing more and more is that this gap between most organisations and a few that are thinking differently is becoming massive because we're not wired to think exponentially. We think linearly. This whole idea that this thing I'm carrying around in my pocket is going to have the computing power of every brain on this planet in 13 years' time, I can't get my head around that. But it's what's happening. And so our organisations are wired, structured, and the way that we think is linear, and yet we've got a world that's going exponential on us. Most of you hear this stuff all the time and are talking about it, but there's a few organisations that are actually getting this right, and they're doing some really, really incredible stuff. So to contrast this, we work with an organisation called carsales.com.au. Anybody heard of them before? They're kind of a bit like the Xero of Australia at the moment. This little startup's now generating $500 million of revenue per year. It's disrupting the entire media industry in the car. I guess what you would do on Trade Me in terms of buying cars and with dealers is what they're doing in Australia. $500 million of revenue. They're making $250 million EBIT out of it. I wish I had a business that was making 50% profit. And they're now in about 30 countries. These guys are sitting there disrupting the industry, and when we talk with them, they're saying the speed of change in our organisation needs to grow exponentially. We need to do 25 years worth of change at the pace we've been moving at the next 5 years. So for example, they've just put ERP, CRM, data integration, putting machine learning around their business intelligence, and from the time that they came up with the concept to the time they executed and went live, took them 5.5 months. Most of us are still there thinking about what we're going to do. That's what an exponential organisation looks like. And so we get to see some of these things. I want to share 3 approaches that we think these best organisations, these few that are really doing something different, and what are they actually doing? First one is they're using their data to challenge their existing business model. Now, what do I mean by that? So typically we start with that business strategy and we come up with a whole lot of initiatives. And then we put some traditional business intelligence around that. We try to give insight back against those initiatives. We put metrics and KPIs and reports, and we help see whether these things are on track and whether they're really returning on investment. So that's still super, super important, especially when you look at the fact that 48% of those initiatives are not delivering any return on investment. We need to make sure we're doing that right. But in parallel with that, they're flipping that on its head. And I guess they're starting with a business intelligence 2.0 type view. They're thinking contextually, they're thinking about contingency in that data, and they're looking at what's going on with those initiatives, both inside their own organisation around the world, and they're rethinking what they could do with the data and the information that they've got, and they're going back and they're challenging their business model. They are reinventing themselves as a digital business. I guess the extreme of this is the is the Googles and the Amazon of the world that see themselves purely as a data business, but there's lots of other organisations doing it too. And so challenging and aligning your business to think exponentially, it's a whole cultural shift. It's a different way of thinking. So here's a really simple example. Example of a company that does hothouses, greenhouses that grow tomatoes inside them. They control the humidity, they control the temperature, and they've got some disruption going on, so they think they need to have some IoT type devices here, and they want to put an app on the phone so that their customers can sit there and see what the temperature and humidity is. So that's a fair enough kind of thing to do. But if you think differently around that and go, actually, what are these growers trying to do? They're actually about maximising their tomato crop. What's the yield out of this? And so what's the data that I have, but also what is the data that I could collect? And if they start thinking differently about it, they come up with all sorts of different ideas, like, actually, we can put little IoT devices in here and we can look at the soil conditions and the temperature and the humidity and relate that back to tomato growth. And we can sell that as a device as a service. That's come from looking at their data and thinking about what other data could I get. Now they've got a whole lot of data in terms of how tomatoes grow. Well, let's have a joint venture with a fertiliser manufacturer, and we'll sit out there and we know how much fertiliser that they need, so we'll target them with campaigns and we'll actually supply the fertiliser to them. Now we've got all this technology. Actually, these devices are really cheap. Maybe there's a home version in a retail market that we could go into for home horticulture hobbyists. And what else could we do? Well, if we start putting some low-cost cameras in here and recording what's going on with those tomato growths, we can now tie that back to the data and we can become real experts in terms of the conditions that you need to grow tomatoes. That is an example of taking data that you've got and thinking differently about it and reinventing yourself as a digital business. It's a completely different approach than sitting there and just looking at what I've got today and trying to optimize it and improve it. That's what exponential businesses look like. Second thing that we're seeing going on with the best organisations is this real rapid testing out new hypotheses. Call it fail fast. We prefer to call it succeed quickly. But they're finding ways to do this. They're testing a lot more stuff. It's like startup mentality. When I talk to the guys in startups, some of the guys we talk to sit there with a business idea in week one. They're out in the street prototyping it and testing it with customers with a mock-up by the end of that week. They go through the second iteration. They haven't even built technology, and they're up in Silicon Valley in week 3, and they are raising venture capital. That's startup mentality. How do I bring that into testing these hypotheses inside my organisation? So they're testing a lot more, and they're testing it a lot more quickly. And typically, we can't respond with our current approach and our current tools to that. So we need to make our data much more available. We can't sit there and wait for silver bullets. We seem to always be sitting there going, when's the next cool piece of technology that's going to fix this for me? Well, there isn't a silver bullet, and it's moving so fast, the technology that doesn't keep up, and it's probably a people and process issue predominantly anyway. And we need to spend a lot more time doing the analysis, and in particular doing stuff, than sitting there setting this up so that we can try and talk about it. And the third one is that they realise that there's a big shift going on here from, I've got to control and structure the data I've got, to she with the most data is going to win this game. Why is that? It's because we've got this massive amount of existing and new data hitting us. Here's the average enterprise today, 108 SaaS apps. IT know that 50% of them exist, and the rest somebody's bought on their credit card that have now got my business logic in it. We've got an ERP system full of transactional data. I've got this IoT and edge computing infield data starting to hit me. I've got a CRM with transactional data. I've got a legacy system, and sadly most of us are still running half of our business on business logic buried in a spreadsheet somewhere that's not connected to anything. We need a new way, and I guess what's changing here is the cost to start pulling this together is decreasing rapidly, and our ability to do stuff with it is changing, and it's changing almost daily. This massive investment in exponential technologies there, but we've got to get the people side right and the process side to connect with that and utilise it and think differently. I don't know if anyone's seen this before. We can share this with you afterwards if you like, if you want to see it. This is the data science hierarchy of needs, right? And I see in the agenda, everybody, all of us, me included, are so excited about machine learning and what that's going to lead to in terms of deep learning and artificial intelligence ultimately. But to do that, you need data. And it starts down the bottom here. We've got stuff we can leverage now. More importantly, we've got to start thinking about what's the data that we are going to need and start collecting it and putting these pipelines into our infrastructure so that we've got it there as we work out what we want to do with it. We don't even know what the questions are half the time. And so the shift with these guys is they are really not only trying to leverage what they can now, but they're building for the future and collecting massive, massive amounts of data. And so we can sit here and we can talk about to the cows come home. I want to share with you 3 practical examples to highlight this of real things that are happening now with some of these exponential organisations. The first one we'll call impossible analysis. It's just not possible for me to do that. We can't do it the way we approach it. And so here's a real example. This is a print media company that we've been doing some work with, and obviously everything to do with media and advertising is massively disrupted in all of our markets at the moment. And so they've got multiple business units, pretty large business. They've got disparate data for Africa. They've got systems and stuff all over the place through that business. They've got a lot of structured customer behaviour data. They've got a whole lot of unstructured customer data, and they've got a whole lot of other stuff that they know is there, but they don't know what to do with it. Like they have people out delivering that media physically so they can track them on their phones and things like that. So they've got location data. And they had a whole lot of questions. Conversations kind of go like this. We think there might be some correlations between what our different customers are doing in different parts of the country. We think there might be some new offerings we could really target them with. God knows we've really got to track these customer journeys, and we've got to really be able to target them individually. And man, I need to prove to these advertisers that this is the right place for them to spend their money, because we're losing our advertising quickly and they're going through all sorts of other channels. And so the question is, well, what the heck can I do with this data? And then they go, well, it's all over the place, it's disparate systems, it's a really good idea, but it's going to take way too long, it's going to cost me way too much, it's just too hard, right? I can't do it with my existing infrastructure. Here's a change in approach. In a 2-week proof of concept, driven by the business, no IT, no hardware, no infrastructure effectively put in place, they were able to uncover a whole lot of significant new insights about what was in that data, and more importantly, like the hothouse control guys, they've come up with a whole lot of ideas in terms of how they can transform that business and change what their business actually means to become a digital business. And just to give you a taste from a technical point of view, it's this kind of stuff that we couldn't even really do even 6 months ago. So they got all these data sources. There's over 1 billion rows worth of data. That was fired into 500 CPUs, 236 hours of processing time. It took 27 minutes for that to run. Then got thrown out into Google's BigQuery and data analytics tool, and the whole process of doing that in terms of processing and compute power cost them less than $20. That's just phenomenal compared to what we have been able to do. So the technology is less and less the constraint. It's not about the tools, the current constraint. It's what am I trying to do with it, and then lining yourself up and getting on with it. That's the first example I wanted to share. Second one is we've kind of got these untapped gold mines in our organisations that we didn't know that we could do anything with. And so if you think about call centres as an example, typically thousands and thousands of hours of audio recorded in these damn call centres. And typically the best you can do with it is you do a manual sample and do some analysis. So somebody sits there and listens to the thing and does some stats on it and produces some reports. Or if there's an exception and there's a customer complaint, you can go back and look at those calls afterwards. But inside there, the questions when you talk to the people that run call centres really want to know are things like, does the call length contribute to a really positive experience that my customer gets? If they're there for longer, is it, how does that contribute? And what's the sentiment inside that call? What topics are customers most negative about? What are the patterns going on inside that? What time of day are people the most negative? which call centre operators are the best at turning a negative conversation around into positive conversation? They've got a list of questions. It takes 10 minutes to get it out of these leaders of these call centres, but they don't think they can do anything with it. And so if you take a different approach now and say we've got this audio as a data source, we can now take that, convert that into text, run sentiment analysis across it, chuck it into a query engine, and start really doing some analytics. And that's just to get to phase one before we then try and do really cool things with machine learning and try and do some automation off the end of it. That's stuff that you can do now and relatively low costs. So that's the second example. And the final example is what we like to call real-time value stream mapping. So I think there might have been a presentation on Kaizen this morning, talking about lean. So here's a typical lean approach. I come from a manufacturing background. I'm a big convert on value stream mapping and process diagrams. And typically you get some people in, or you have some people in your organisation, and you're looking for waste inside your internal processes or quality issues. So here's a process, and you might see in your business. So customer comes to your website, looks up some product info, requests a quote. Someone configures a deal for them, you prepare that quote, we might email it back to them, then we might transact it if they want to purchase from us, might send them another email to say, thanks, we'll get on to it. Work order gets created, we put it into some sort of manufacturing, we package it up, put it on a truck or a boat and ship it to you. Probably send you an email to say that, hey, it's on its way. Track it, real-time tracking's pretty standard these days. Customer gets their product, probably send them another email and say, can you give us some feedback? And then if it's one of these kind of IoT products, we've got it connected in the field and we've got some data coming back. Seems like a process. And here's our traditional BI approach. We go, oh, along the way, I've recorded a whole lot of transactional data here. It's in my CRM system, it's in my ERP system. Let's structure that data and I'll fire it into a big data warehouse somewhere and I'll do some reporting on it. Now that's not without value, right? There is value out of that stuff, but it's looking at the transactional data and them trying to summarize that up. So it's still important, but it can't answer heaps of the really important questions that the business wants to know about and increasingly want to know about. Things like, what's actually driving my cash-to-cash cycle? From when it costs me money to when I get paid. Not just what it is, they can measure what it is, but it doesn't tell me what's driving that inside it. Where are my customer experience bottlenecks? What's causing the customer experience issues inside that? Which processes are causing poor customer experience? Where is my rework happening? There are thousands and thousands of those questions that business leaders and people driving initiatives want to answer, but historically, we've been able to do some business intelligence and tell them what the answer is at the end, but we can't tell them why. And we have to put time and motion studies and lean value stream mapping people in here. Here's what we think is starting to emerge. If you take a different view of this and flip away from a transactional view of this and start thinking about, there's a whole lot of events that happen. Each one of those steps, there's a number of events that happen. If you think about what we increasingly know, we know what happened, when it happened, what triggered it to happen, what it triggered next, who did it, where it happened, how it happened. And so we've got contexts around that event, increasingly like we've never had ever before. And so if I can take that event stream, instead of the transaction stream, throw that into this big data storage, which is now becoming really, really cheap and easy to do, yes, I can run some analytics on that, and that's interesting. But now I've got incredible richness of information to start looking for the patterns and the interactions that go on, and this is where things like machine learning are really going to add value. It's a different type of data source that we can collect now, and once we do that, we really can focus on automation, and that's where the real disruptive plays are happening, and that automation will change customer experience incredibly, and it's going to take a whole lot of cost out of our businesses while we do it. That's where we think the best people are starting to go. And so I'll come back to the title of this little presentation to end the day off. Creating the path towards a data-driven business vision. Hopefully it wasn't as boring to hear as the title was. This gap, make no mistake, is really real. Most of us are still thinking in a linear fashion in our organisation, and there's no doubt we are doing some cool stuff that moves our businesses forward. We've got things that are adding business value, lots of initiatives underway, and they are making some gains. But our challenge is not that. It's, are we moving forward as fast as these people that are working out how to do this, really thinking about their businesses exponentially and challenging their businesses with the data that they've got today and the data that they can collect and do something cool with for the future. There's no secret in the stat anymore. Most of you have probably seen it, that 50% of the Fortune 500 companies today will not be here in 10 years' time. It's not because they're idiots. They've got more investment than anybody going on. They've got data scientists. They've got the tools for Africa. 50% of them are going to fail. They're going to fail because they're moving their businesses forward in a linear fashion, and they're getting disrupted by businesses that are thinking exponentially. And that is our challenge, is to enable our businesses to be able to operate that way and not be part of the 50% that don't exist in 10 years' time. And so my message out of this really is, very clever people in the room, and I'm sure you're doing some cool stuff, and I'd love to hear more about it. And some of you will be operating, I'm sure, in an exponential way. But don't get fooled because you are moving forward and making some gains, that you are moving exponentially if you're only thinking and improving linearly. Because if you get stuck in that traditional mode, you're going to get left behind. My challenge, I guess, to all of us is we need to create this data-driven business culture. The people, the processes, the technology that can respond in this new world that we're in and embrace this exponential acceleration that's going on. And we better damn well start now before it's too late. Thanks. If you want to talk to me, there's my contact details. I'll be around tonight, and some of our team are around here over the next couple of days. So thank you.